The text message came through at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Financial Tower. My assistant had just brought me coffee, and I was deep into analyzing portfolio performance when my phone buzzed with what would turn out to be the most expensive text message my brother Marcus had ever sent. "Hey sis, hope you don't mind, but I sold your Honda for $5,000. You never drive it anyway, and I really needed the cash. Thanks for understanding." I stared at the message for a full 30 seconds, reading it 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding something. Then I sat down my coffee cup very carefully and leaned back in my leather chair, looking out at the city skyline while processing what my brother had just confessed to in writing. Marcus thought he had sold my old Honda for $5,000. What he'd actually done was steal and illegally dispose of a 2019 McLaren 720S Spider that was registered as a company asset of Apex Capital Management, the investment firm I'd founded and built into a $4.2 billion empire over the past 6 years. The car was worth $347,000. I picked up my phone and typed a simple response. Interesting. Then I buzzed my assistant. "Sarah, please get David Chin from our legal department on the line immediately and cancel my 4 p.m. meeting. Something urgent has come up." While I waited for the call, I pulled up the vehicle registration documents on my computer. The McLaren was registered to Apex Capital Management with me listed as the authorized driver. It was purchased as a company asset for client entertainment and business purposes, which meant it was protected under federal commercial theft statutes. Marcus had just committed federal grand theft auto. My phone rang. "David, I need you to listen carefully because this is going to sound unbelievable." "What's the situation, Sophie?" "My brother just texted me to inform me that he sold company vehicle VIN Sajad 4GX5CN01234 for $5,000. The McLaren. He sold the McLaren. Apparently, he thought it was my personal Honda Civic." There was a long pause. "Sophie, that's a $350,000 vehicle registered as company property. That's not just theft. That's major felony theft of corporate assets." "I'm aware. What's our protocol for this situation?" "We have to report it immediately. Federal law requires us to report theft of company assets over $100,000 within 24 hours. The FBI handles cases involving interstate commerce and vehicles of this value." I looked at Marcus' cheerful text message again, complete with a smiley face emoji. "David, I want you to file the report immediately. Include the text message as evidence and request that they move quickly before the vehicle leaves the jurisdiction. Sophie, you realize this means your brother will be arrested. My brother stole a company car worth $350,000. The law is the law, but surely he didn't know. David, ignorance of the value doesn't change the fact that he took someone else's property without permission and sold it. File the report." After hanging up, I sat in my office trying to process how we'd gotten to this point. Marcus was my younger brother by 3 years, and for his entire adult life, he'd operated under the assumption that I was his struggling older sister who worked some boring finance job and lived modestly in a small apartment. This assumption wasn't entirely his fault. For 6 years, I deliberately maintained the appearance of a modest lifestyle. I drove the McLaren only for business purposes and client meetings. For family functions and casual outings, I drove a 2015 Honda Civic that I'd kept specifically to maintain my cover. The family had no idea that I was Sophie Chin, founder and CEO of Apex Capital Management, one of the fastest-growing investment firms on the West Coast. They thought I was just another middle management employee at some generic financial services company. Marcus worked as a sales manager at a furniture store and was constantly struggling with money. He lived paycheck to paycheck, had mounting credit card debt, and had developed a gambling problem that he thought the family didn't know about. He'd been borrowing money from various family members for months, always with elaborate stories about temporary setbacks and promising to pay everyone back. Last week, he'd asked to borrow my Honda to help a friend move some furniture. I'd said yes, assuming he meant the actual Honda Civic that I kept in the parking garage below my apartment building. Instead, he'd somehow gotten hold of the keys to the McLaren, which I'd left at my parents' house after a family dinner 2 weeks ago. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. The buyer seemed really excited about the car. Said something about it being a rare model. Anyway, thanks again for being cool about this. I stared at the message in amazement. The buyer had probably just acquired a $350,000 supercar for $5,000 and was undoubtedly thrilled about the deal. Marcus, meanwhile, had no idea he'd just committed a federal felony. Sarah knocked on my door. Miss Chin, I have Agent Rebecca Martinez from the FBI Financial Crimes Division on line 1. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. Agent Martinez, thank you for calling so quickly. Miss Chin, I've reviewed the initial report from your legal team. Can you confirm that your brother took and sold a 2019 McLaren 720S Spider without your knowledge or permission? That's correct. He sent me a text message approximately an hour ago informing me that he'd sold what he thought was my Honda Civic for $5,000 and the vehicle was registered as a company asset. Yes, to Apex Capital Management. I can provide all the registration and insurance documents. We're going to need to move quickly on this. Do you know the identity of the buyer? No, but my brother mentioned that the buyer seemed excited about getting a rare model. I suspect the buyer knew exactly what they were purchasing. That suggests potential conspiracy or receipt of stolen goods. We'll need to interview your brother immediately to get the buyer's information. Agent Martinez, I should mention that my brother has no idea about the actual value of the car or my business. He genuinely believes he sold a worthless old Honda. That doesn't change the legal situation, Miss Chin. Theft is theft, regardless of the perpetrator's knowledge of the item's value. I understand. I just wanted you to be aware of the circumstances. We'll be in touch within the next few hours. Please don't contact your brother or anyone else about this until we've had a chance to investigate. After the call ended, I tried to focus on work, but I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation I'd have to have with my family. They were about to learn two shocking truths: that I was significantly more successful than they'd imagined, and that Marcus had committed a serious federal crime. At 6:30 p.m., my phone rang. It was my mother. Sophie, something terrible has happened. FBI agents came to Marcus' apartment and arrested him. They said something about car theft, but that doesn't make any sense. Marcus doesn't steal cars. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Mom, where are you now? At the police station with your father. Marcus is asking for a lawyer, but we don't understand what's happening. The agents mentioned your name. They said you filed a complaint. Mom, I need you and Dad to sit down. I'm going to explain everything, but it's complicated. Sophie, please just tell me what's going on. Marcus borrowed what he thought was my Honda Civic. Instead, he took and sold a McLaren that belongs to my company. It's worth about $350,000. The silence on the other end of the line lasted nearly a minute. Sophie, that's not possible. You don't own a $350,000 car. Actually, Mom, I do. And it's not the only one. What do you mean? I mean that your daughter, who you think works a regular office job, actually runs a $4.2 billion investment firm. Another long silence. Sophie, this isn't the time for jokes. I'm not joking, Mom. I'm the CEO of Apex Capital Management. I have been for 6 years. But you live in that little apartment. You drive that old Honda. Because I chose to keep my success private from the family, because I wanted to see who you all were when you thought I had nothing. And now Marcus is in jail. Marcus committed federal grand theft auto. He stole company property and sold it illegally. But he didn't know. That doesn't change the law, Mom. I could hear my father's voice in the background asking what was happening. Mom, put me on speaker. Dad needs to hear this, too.
Sophie.
Dad's voice came through clearly. Can you explain what's happening to your brother? Dad, Marcus asked to borrow what he thought was my old Honda. Instead, he took a McLaren worth $350,000 that's registered as company property. He sold it for $5,000 and texted me about it like it was no big deal. A McLaren? Sophie? How do you have a McLaren? Because I own Apex Capital Management. It's an investment firm worth $4.2 billion. I could hear both my parents talking at once, their voices overlapping in confusion and disbelief. Listen, I said loudly enough to cut through their conversation. I know this is shocking, but right now we need to focus on Marcus. He's going to need a very good lawyer, and he's going to need one immediately. Sophie, Dad's voice was strained. Can you help him? Can you drop the charges? Dad, it's not that simple. Once a theft of this magnitude is reported, it becomes a federal matter. I can't just drop the charges, but you could try. I could talk to the prosecutor about Marcus' circumstances and his lack of knowledge about the car's value. But Dad, he still committed a serious crime. Over the next 2 hours, I found myself coordinating my brother's legal defense while simultaneously trying to explain to my parents how their daughter had become a billionaire without them noticing. I arranged for Marcus to be represented by Patricia Williams, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the city. I also called Agent Martinez to provide additional context about Marcus' financial situation and gambling problems. Agent Martinez, I want to be clear that I'm not trying to excuse my brother's actions, but I think you should know that he has significant gambling debts and has been desperate for money. That actually makes the situation worse, Miss Chin. It establishes motive for the theft. I understand, but I also think you should know that he genuinely had no idea what he was selling. If he'd known it was worth $350,000, he wouldn't have sold it for $5,000. We'll take that into consideration during our investigation. The next morning, I received a call from Patricia Williams. Sophie, I've met with your brother. He's in complete shock about the situation. What's his status? He's been charged with federal grand theft auto and conspiracy to commit wire fraud since he sold the vehicle across state lines using online platforms. The conspiracy charge relates to the buyer, who we believe knew the car's actual value. What's he looking at in terms of sentencing? If convicted on all charges, potentially 10 to 15 years in federal prison. I felt sick to my stomach. Patricia, what can we do? The prosecutor is willing to consider a plea deal if Marcus cooperates fully in recovering the vehicle and identifying the buyer. They're also interested in information about any other stolen property transactions. Other transactions? Sophie, it appears your brother has been involved in several questionable sales over the past few months. The FBI is investigating whether this was part of a larger stolen property operation. This was getting worse by the hour. That afternoon, I drove to the Federal Detention Center to visit Marcus. He looked terrible, pale, shaken, and about 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. Sophie, I don't understand any of this. They're saying I stole a $350,000 car, but I swear I thought it was just your old Honda. Marcus, where did you get the keys? From the key hook at Mom and Dad's house. There were 2 sets of car keys hanging there. I took the ones that looked newer. The newer keys were for the McLaren. But why did you have a McLaren at Mom and Dad's house? I looked at my brother through the reinforced glass, realizing that the conversation we were about to have would change our relationship forever. Because I drove it to family dinner 2 weeks ago because I own several cars, and that's the one I happened to take that day. Sophie, this doesn't make sense. How do you own a McLaren? You work in finance. Marcus, I don't just work in finance. I own a finance company. A big one. I spent the next 30 minutes explaining Apex Capital Management, my role as founder and CEO, and the scope of my business success. Marcus listened with an expression of growing amazement and horror as he realized the magnitude of what he'd done. Sophie, you're saying you're rich? Like really rich? I'm saying I'm very successful, and the car you sold was worth more than most people's houses. But why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were just getting by? Because I wanted to see who you all really were when you thought I had nothing to offer you. And now I know that when you needed money, instead of asking your successful sister for help, you decided to steal what you thought was my worthless car. Marcus put his head in his hands. Sophie, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I know you didn't, but Marcus, this isn't just about the car. The FBI thinks you've been involved in other stolen property sales. What? Oh, Sophie, I've never stolen anything before in my life. Then explain the investigation into your eBay sales. Explain the electronics and jewelry you've been selling online over the past few months. Marcus's face went pale. Those weren't stolen. Those were items I won gambling. You won $50,000 worth of electronics and jewelry gambling? Sophie, I know how it sounds, but I swear those were legitimate winnings. I looked at my brother and realized he was probably telling the truth about the other items, but lying to himself about his gambling problem being under control. Marcus, the FBI is going to want documentation of every item you've sold and where you got it. If you really won everything gambling, you'll need to provide proof. Over the next week, the investigation expanded as the FBI traced the McLaren to a sophisticated car theft ring operating across 3 states. The buyer, who'd purchased the car from Marcus, was actually a known fence who specialized in high-end vehicles. Marcus' cooperation led to the arrest of 6 other people and the recovery of over $2 million worth of stolen vehicles. In exchange for his assistance, the prosecutor agreed to reduce the charges to a single count of grand theft with a recommendation for probation and community service. But the real reckoning came at the family meeting I called for the following Sunday. I gathered my parents, Marcus, and my sister Jennifer at Mom and Dad's house to have the conversation we should have had years ago. Before we talk about Marcus' situation, I need to address the bigger issue here, I began. For 6 years, I've been living a double life. You've all thought I was struggling financially while I've actually been building a multi-billion-dollar business. Jennifer was the first to speak. Sophie, are you seriously telling us you're rich and you've been pretending to be poor? I'm telling you that I built something extraordinary, and I wanted to see if my family would love and support me when they thought I had nothing to offer. And what did you learn? Dad asked. I learned that when Marcus needed money, he chose to steal from me rather than ask for help. I learned that none of you ever asked about my goals, my dreams, or what I was working toward. I learned that you all made assumptions about my life based on external appearances. Marcus looked up from the table. Sophie, if I'd known about your success, I never would have taken the car. Marcus, if you'd known about my success, you would have asked me for money instead of gambling it away. You still wouldn't have addressed the real problem. What real problem? Your gambling addiction. Your inability to manage money, your pattern of making desperate decisions when you're in trouble. The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary. Marcus admitted to gambling debts totaling over $80,000. Jennifer revealed that she'd been loaning him money for months. My parents confessed that they'd been worried about both of their children, Marcus, because of his obvious financial problems, and me, because they thought I was failing to achieve my potential. The irony, I told them, is that you were worried about the wrong child. Sophie, Mom said, we're proud of your success, but we're hurt that you didn't trust us with the truth. Mom, the truth is that I built something incredible while you all assumed I was failing. The truth is that when Marcus needed help, his first instinct was to take what he thought was my worthless possession rather than ask his family for support. But we would have helped him, Dad protested. Would you? With what money? None of you had any idea that I could have solved Marcus' problems with a single phone call. 6 months later, Marcus completed his community service and started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. I hired him as a junior analyst at Apex Capital Management with the understanding that any relapse into gambling would result in immediate termination. The McLaren was eventually recovered, though it required significant repairs after being damaged during the police chase that ended the car theft ring's operation. My relationship with my family improved dramatically once everything was out in the open. I moved out of my modest apartment and into a penthouse that reflected my actual financial situation. I started driving my luxury cars to family events instead of the Honda Civic. But the most important change was that we began having honest conversations about money, success, and what it means to support each other as a family. Marcus called me one evening about a year after his arrest. Sophie, I need to ask you something. What's that? Do you think you'll ever really forgive me for what I did? I considered the question. Marcus, I forgave you the day it happened. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. What does it mean? It means I gave you a second chance to show me who you really are. It means I chose to believe you could learn from your mistakes and become better. And have I become better? You tell me. You've been clean for a year. You're working hard. You're paying back your debts. You're making good choices. I am. And Sophie, thank you for not giving up on me. That's what family does, Marcus. Real family doesn't give up on each other, but real family also doesn't steal from each other.
I know.
I'm sorry it took me getting arrested to figure that out. The experience taught me something important about family dynamics and the difference between love and respect. My family had always loved me, but they hadn't respected me when they thought I was unsuccessful. Marcus had taken the car because he saw me as someone whose possessions didn't matter, whose success didn't exist, whose life could be disrupted without consequences. Now, our relationships were built on mutual respect and honest communication. Marcus understood that actions have consequences regardless of intentions. My parents understood that success comes in many forms and assumptions can be dangerous. And I understood that sometimes the most expensive lesson isn't the one you pay for, it's the one you teach.